Howdy, I'm Tim, and welcome to my channel. Specifically, welcome to one of my bootleg mini-verses. Today, we're discussing two of my favorite dual-time Rolex watches. Very different looks and very different styles. The watches are almost identical mechanically, close in size, and hail from the same manufacturer, but the Explorer II and the GMT Master II are worlds apart in character. We're going to explore the difference between the two of them. So let's start with the elder statesman of the two, the GMT Master II. This is the current generation Oyster Perpetual GMT Master II 116710LN. The basic case shape and full solid link bracelet bowed for the anniversary model, all in gold in 2005. The steel model seen here bowed at Basel 2008. You will note that the GMT is smaller than the Explorer II, 40 millimeters across the round of the case. The timepiece is slimmer than the Explorer II at 12.1 millimeters. Lug to lug, you're going to find this one measures 48.1 millimeters, and then if you include the solid end links of the bracelet, it's 51 millimeters. You're also going to find that the spacing between the lugs is 20 millimeters on the GMT versus 21 millimeters on the larger Explorer. The timepiece does feature different bracelet finish. As you can see, the Explorer II all satin center links, the GMT Master II polished center links, and that continues on the clasp. Where the Explorer has a full satin clasp on its top, there's a straight through polish on both clasp body and the clamshell itself. Opening it up, both of these watches feature the EasyLink 5mm adjustment system. Tool free, it allows you to add or remove the length equivalent of one sizable link, but both of them also feature, and we'll see if we can show this to better effect, 3 incremental adjustment notches inside the clasp, and you can access that using a strap tool. There's a spring bar that adjusts the anchoring point of the bracelet itself, so there's adjustability built in here that's not simply a function of easy link or removable links. Jump into the case. This was the advent of the super case in the Rolex family tree. Squared off, sheer of side, a little bit industrial in profile. On the GMT, despite the fact that it is a smaller watch overall, its lugs are more squared off. They are broader. I actually measured the ends of the lugs on these watches. They are significantly smaller on the Explorer II. It's not just a trick of the eye. The aspect ratio of the case is wider and flatter, relatively speaking, but the lugs themselves are more tapered and a bit more graceful on the Explorer II. Jumping back to the GMT, let's talk a little bit about how this watch differs functionally from the Explorer II. A lot of it comes down to the bezel, whereas the Explorer II features a 70s-inspired engraved and radially brushed satin-finished fixed bezel. The GMT has always been about the adjustments and the readings you can take using the bidirectional aviator-style bezel. The original mid-50s Pan Am-inspired GMT Master was designed to temporarily show 2 time zones. Since 1983, in the first GMT Master II, we can actually show 3 time zones because you can move the 2 hour hands independently. Let's show how this works, and let's be real simple here. Say you set the watch to Greenwich Mean Time, so it's going to be the time in London, right on the prime meridian. They are GMT, they are the reference for the rest of the world. I'm going to set my 24-hour hand to 2000, that is 8 o'clock. Let's say it is now 8 o'clock in London, and New York is my destination. So I'm flying from London to New York, and they're going to be GMT -5, so I'm going to take my bezel, reading the time in London, I'm going to offset 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Now I can see it is 1500 or 3 o'clock in New York, 3 p.m., when it is 8 p.m. in Greenwich. And the reason I say, or London, the reason I say there are 3 time zones here is because I can actually move that local hour hand independently, and I can jump the time zone forward or backwards. Same function on the Explorer II, but I don't have this bezel on the Explorer II, so I don't have that ability to read at a glance the local time in my port or airport of calling. You'll also note that this is a full ceramic insert in Rolex Cerachrom with platinum deposits about the calibrations, so a very different composition as well as different functionality about the bezel of the GMT. And although this is not a diving bezel, keep in mind that because it can be used as a timing organ, as long as you're not depending on it as life-saving equipment, you can just pretend that 6 is 15 minutes, 12 is 30 minutes, 18 is 45 minutes, and treat it much like you would the diving bezel on a Submariner. Submariner. Again, don't use it for diving, don't make it life-saving equipment, but you can use it for reading the passage of time as well as the locality. Dial bases are quite distinct. This is a gloss black, and this is a gloss white. And I do mean gloss. It's like a lacquer white. Here's where the Explorer II really comes into its own because it has more character and charm about it. Both watches feature full gold features, but those on the Explorer have been blackened to provide higher contrast. I find this watch easier to read at a glance, and of course, in reference to the first generation Explorer II, the 1971 to mid-1980s 1655, there is a big orange arrow. Those watches were often called the Steve McQueens. Keep in mind the arrival of the white dial didn't occur until the 16550 transitional reference of the 1980s. And this is truly a white dial. It is not silvered, it is not opaline, it is absolutely radiant and gloss white, and I love that. I also find that the watch tends to wear the Cyclops Eye magnifier better in proportion to its size. A more crowded dial on the 40mm watch, further constrained by the ingress of a rotating bezel, can create a bit of awkwardness. Not everyone loves this look, whereas this is far cleaner, and in as much as the date window is the same color as the dial, it almost blends right in, so it's less crowded and it blends in better. I'm also going to give a quick shout out, however, to the GMT for the use of color. This was the arrival of the green GMT hand. This generation of GMT has alternately featured green GMT hand, green script at 6 o'clock, green numbers on date wheel, green dials. Green is the Rolex color, and for the anniversary series GMTs starting in 2005, green has always been a permanent feature. That said, the world needs more orange watches, and this is a sensational one. It's definitely quirkier, it plays to a smaller crowd. At the same time, I also know far fewer of these are sold, and at $8,100, this is the cheaper, or I should say, more accessibly priced watch of the two. Let's talk about how the Explorer II fits on the wrist. They're both 100 meters water resistant, by the way. One feature I do want to call out, the Explorer II, 100 meters water resistant with a traditional twin lock crown. Rolex slips in a trip lock crown on the GMT, leading me to believe that though rated the same 100 meters, the GMT is actually more water resistant in practice than the Explorer II. Okay, the Explorer II. This model bowed at Baselworld 2011, and it dropped some jaws because of its size. The timepiece is large. Now, you might say, if you've been through a messy divorce, that having been made half of the man you once were, your ex wears a Rolex. But if you have the Explorer II, well, your Rolex is your ex. Explorer II definitely playing to a smaller crowd than the GMT, and the polar white dial playing to a smaller crowd than the black dial Explorer II. I'm also going to mention that the watch, although somewhat thicker than the GMT at 12.4 millimeters thick, effectively looks flatter. The aspect ratio is changed by the broader case at 42 millimeters across, so it looks flatter even though it is slightly thicker. Lug to lug, it's a big boy, 50.2 millimeters lug to lug. If you include the solid end links to the bracelet, it is 53.4, meaning it's about as broad across the wrist as something like a 40 millimeter Betterini case Panerai Luminor. If you're familiar with that, you'll be familiar with this, and you'll be able to fit this. I'm also going to mention that the spacing between the lugs is broader. It's 21 millimeters, and this is a rare modern Rolex that actually looks more at home on a strap than it does on the factory bracelet. Substantively, there's no qualitative difference between this and the GMT Master II. It's just a finishing difference, this one being a bit more matte. You're going to note that the bezel has been deliciously finished with a brushed radial pattern and a polished lip, both features evoking the 1970s when lapping machines were used to create this radial brushed effect on bezels and case tops. So the watch is self-consciously a bit of a retro piece, even though strictly speaking Rolex doesn't do vintage tributes. This one is that just a bit. Let's get a bit less light here because I feel like I'm washing out this dial. Now internally, the watch does have a different movement. It has the caliber 3187. The only difference between that and the 3186 is the size of the date wheel and the fact that the 3187 uses Rolex's own Paraflex shock-absorbing springs. Not necessarily better than the KIF used on the 3186, but we do like to talk about our watches being all Rolex, and that particular piece is Rolex, whereas the GMT Master II of that 116710 generation still uses the old KIF springs. Functionally, they're the same. Automatic winding 48-hour power reserve, COSC certified Swiss chronometers, Parachrom blue anti-magnetic hairspring, free-sprung full balance bridge for shock protection, overcoil hairsprings for resistance to positionally induced timing deviation. This comes down to a matter of personal style, and though I am sleight of wrist, I like the quirkiness, the deliberate oddity, as well as the rarity of the Polar Explorer II. My X is a Rolex. See them both on the watch box.